Yet another Linux distribution has ditched Fedora, completely said bye-bye Mozilla, and moved to Brave. This seems to be a trend. I'm just going to put this out there. This seems to be a growing trend. Let me see here. So this was just at the end of March. It was announced that Zorin OS, another Linux distribution, had dropped Firefox for Brave. And a lot of this came about because of Mozilla Firefox's absolutely asinine changes to their terms of use. Basically, their terms of use declared that if you typed something, clicked something, uploaded something, or just had a tab open at a particular URL, all of that data, including everything else the browser knew about you, your physical location, your IP address, all of it, that Mozilla could do whatever it wanted with that data. Whatever it wanted. Anything at all. Sell it to advertisers, use it to advertise to you, use it to train AI systems. Doesn't have to tell you about it. Full worldwide non-revocable license to do whatever the heck they wanted with your data. People were obviously not super psyched about that. Crazy, I know, right? So multiple Linux distributions, because Linux users are a little bit concerned about things like, privacy, what happens with their data, have been dropping Firefox or mulling it over. The first big one was Zorin OS, and they dropped Firefox, and they had a process that they went through trying to evaluate all the different browsers out there because they needed something that worked well for their users, that respected privacy, that was relatively configurable so they could have custom defaults specifically for their users and all sorts of things like that, right? And what they came to was the only option was Brave. And it wasn't like a political thing. It wasn't well, we just love Brave so much, we're going to shoehorn it in. It was just that was the only option, right? There was no other option that met all of their criteria, that checked every checkbox. There were some good ones. It sounded like when you read through their forums and looked at the discussions they had, there was a few others that they evaluated, including some Firefox forks and some other Chromium-based browsers. And they looked at them and they said, okay, you know what, this one checks, 8 of the 10 checkboxes, but the only one that hit all of them that was actually considerable for them was Brave. So that was back in the end of March. Now, on May 13th, so 2 days ago, 3 days ago, Nobara, which is an up-and-coming distribution. It's based on Fedora, and it's getting a lot more traction. In fact, if you look at like Distro Watch, it's moved into the top 20. I think it's even in the top 15 now. I'm not 100% certain of how big the actual user base is, but I know of people that are running Nobara. Like it seems to be spreading quite a bit. And with their new release, their Nobara 42, the first top item in their changelog, Brave is now the default browser. We ship it with a custom policy that disables the following. And I thought this was interesting. The Brave Rewards and Brave Wallet are disabled. The Brave VPN is disabled. The Brave AI Chat is disabled. And the Brave Tor integration, so for the Onion Network, that's also disabled. So basically, they've gone in and said, okay, we really like the Brave browser, but we're going to disable by default all the various Brave integration features like the wallet, the VPN, Tor, and all those sorts of things. And my understanding is they haven't modified it in any way from there, so users can go in and turn those things back on. And they're shipping it as the default right now. And they were a little less open about the decision-making process for this one, about why exactly they've ditched Firefox. But from what I understand, it was kind of a similar thing to what we had with Zorin OS. The Nobara folks just were like, wow, we can't use Firefox anymore because of the data privacy issues, the just all the problems with Mozilla. They can't use it anymore. It does. A lot of people view these sorts of changes as a very political thing, but I don't think for any of these distributions it really was political. In fact, I think a lot of these Linux distributions are making the change knowing that some people will view a move from Firefox, which is a very leftist. It's run by people on the very extreme left, to Brave, which is run by Brendan Eich, who was the ex-CEO of Mozilla, who was ousted because he's a bit conservative. They view that as somewhat of a political change. But I think these Linux distributions are looking past that, and they're saying, okay, regardless of whether something is leftist or conservative, regardless of what people might think about the politics of the developers involved, just from a pure functionality standpoint, we cannot stay on Firefox. It's basically spyware. And if we ship spyware with our Linux distribution by default, well, what does that say about us? People aren't going to want to be using our distro long term. And I've been pointing this out to a lot of the bigger distributions, the Ubuntus and the Fedoras of the world. And I really wouldn't be surprised if we start to see one or two of the biggest of the Linux distributions start to make these changes as well. Because we're already seeing some of the top 20 distros make the move. I think we're going to start seeing the top 5 distros make that move sometime soon as well. If not to Brave, at least away from Firefox. Because, I mean, just being practical about it, it doesn't make sense to ship Firefox on a privacy and data security-centric operating system. It just doesn't make sense at all. Speaking of the political side of things, I noticed this. This was some days back. When was this? This was oh shoot, I don't even have the date here. It was back in early April. Back in early April, journalists writing for The Register made a post that I thought was very telling, because if you read any of the big tech news sites, you notice a recurring theme when they talk about web browsers. No matter what horrible, crazy stuff Mozilla and Firefox do, turning it into spyware, rebranding themselves as a global crew of activists, giving their CEOs huge multi-million-dollar raises when their market share literally is going sub 2%. Like, I mean, it's just crazy stuff. It takes an absolute mountain of effort to get these news outlets to write anything even remotely critical of Mozilla and Firefox. Like, they'll write something that seems critical at first, but they will ignore all the really big stuff, right? They'll write like halfway critical things, like, oh, there's a little bit of controversy about Mozilla, and maybe we should change a default setting. Can you believe they had that default setting right? And then they'll leave it at that. They will ignore the fact that Mozilla declared as a core goal the censorship and silencing of half the people in the United States. Like, they will just ignore that completely, right? Which is a pretty friggin' big deal for a web browser. So you've noticed that sort of thing happening, but they haven't come out and overtly said their specific political leanings and intentions as it relates to web browsers very often. They changed that. So the Register, Liam Proven, who writes for the Register, and I'm going to just say this flat out, has written some decent articles. If you read the Register and you read through Liam Proven's stuff, it's not all bad. In fact, there's some really good quality, very nerdy, well-researched, worth reading articles in there. But you'll also notice that things tend to skew very political, and a lot of the biggest news gets intentionally ignored. And someone made a post screenshotting the X account of Brave, of the Brave web browser, @Brave, and noted people that follow Brave and said, quote, "Look at these patriots who follow Brave." And well, who are those patriots? The Lunduke Journal, Futo, and Dan Bongino. We're talking things going at the very least centrist, if not, pretty far right? Liam Proven jumps in immediately and he's like, thanks, more with emphasis, good reasons not to use it. So he's saying flat out is he doesn't want to use, and is probably not going to recommend people to use the Brave web browser specifically because some people who are right-leaning use it. That's weird. I mean, that's really weird. Like that's like me coming out and saying the reason I tell people not to use Windows is because I think Joe Biden likes Windows, right? Or something like that. Well, that would be asinine. That would be an asinine reason. Now, if we want to talk about the the political policies, the political focused policies, the actual practical policies that the companies and organizations building the software that they have, okay, fair game. But guilt by association because someone that you don't like politically likes a piece of software, or that a piece of software just follows an X account, that's insane. When you really look through it, there are a huge number of, and I'll let people do their own legwork on this one, just because it'll be fun to see what you guys find. There are a lot of extremely leftist open source projects, foundations, and companies that follow the Lunduke Journal. And some of them follow the Lunduke Journal because they hate the Lunduke Journal. So it would be really, and some of them just do it because I make news and they need to stay abreast of that, especially if it covers them. It would be very weird for someone to note that and go, "Oh my gosh, can you believe this piece of software I love? They follow the Lunduke Journal on X. Well, we cannot use it then. More good reasons not to use that software." That would be insane. That's stupid. I mean, that's just straight up dumb. But it shows you how much the tech journalists of the world are heavily influenced by other people's perceived politics, right? Because they're not even talking here at the Register about the politics of Brave here. They're just saying, oh my gosh, look at what this one X account follows and this other X account. Well, that X account over there, that seems pretty right leaning. More good reason not to use any software that follows it's stupid. It's really, really stupid. And when you look at the coverage from coming out of things like the Register and ZDNet and Verge and on, Gizmodo, holy heavens, Ars Technica, you look at the reporting and they flat out ignore the biggest stories. I mean, the stuff that creates hundreds of millions of dollars of lawsuits, the stuff that could have a dramatic impact on all of the IT employees across the industry. I mean, some of the biggest news stories, whether we're talking about, IBM or Microsoft or Apple or anyone else, they ignore them almost constantly because of the politics. And I think this is just yet one other good example. So what's fascinating to me about this is this. We're seeing a trend of more browsers moving away from Firefox, what is perceived as the leftist browser, to Brave, knowing full well that the tech journalists out there will be unhappy about that move. Because they like the left, having a left-leaning web browser, and they don't like that their perception is that Brave is run by people who are right-leaning, right? They don't like that perception. But these distributions are making the move anyway because it's the only sane choice right now. That's not to say it will be the only sane choice forever. There very well could, another web browser startup could come along at any time. I've got my eye on at least one of them, and could make huge headwaves. But at the moment, there really isn't a sane choice for a good quality web browser outside of Brave, in my personal opinion. And I think many of these distributions are coming to that choice as well. Politics be damned. Opinions about politics from the tech journalists be damned. So will these distributions and creators of these distributions get yelled at by the leftist activists within the open source world because of moving to Brave? Absolutely. They for sure will. But that is not trumping the fact that they need to provide a good web browser and a good out-of-the-box web browsing experience for their users. And the perceived leftist web browsers, the king of which is Firefox, just doesn't provide that currently. So it's an interesting thing watching all this happen. I'm going to keep an eye on this as it goes, because this is a fairly dramatic shift in the overall tech world right now. In fact, I saw kind of an interesting statement, and I probably should have screenshotted it here. But Brendan Eich, the top dog and big kahuna over at Brave, he made a statement responding to some of the recent DOJ v. Microsoft lawsuit stuff. During the current remedy phase of the DOJ v. Google, my bad, Freudian slip there, DOJ v. Google trial, Mozilla gave some testimony during that trial. And during that testimony, the Mozilla representative, I think it was their chief financial officer, was making some statements about daily active users and monthly active users of Firefox. And that's looking at the monthly active users and whatnot is a pretty normal way for a web browser to determine what their overall market share is and whatnot. And Brendan Eich made the comment that, looking at the trajectory of Firefox and looking at the trajectory of Brave, it looks like it could be on track to eclipse, to jump well ahead of Firefox this year in terms of active users. And that to me is a very telling thing, considering you're moving ahead of a brand in web browsing that is almost synonymous with web browsing. The lineage of Netscape and then to Firefox and Mozilla. I mean, that was for a period of time, Firefox was the right choice for web browsing. And now we're in a position where Brave could overtake it in relatively short order. And I think that's a really noteworthy thing. And it's honestly an expected thing, but a surprising thing. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's every so many years within the tech industry, there is an upheaval of some sort. Operating systems decline and fall. Which Linux distribution is the king rises and fall every 5 to 8 years or whatever. There's always this roller coaster ride of up and down. Web browsers up and down. I mean, when you look at who the king of web browsing is on any given year, I mean, there's some pretty dramatic changes. So it's not surprising, considering all of the changes happening. It's not surprising, it's almost expected that we are primed for a dramatic shift. But just the same, it's surprising to see Brave, started by the ex-CEO of Mozilla, overtake Mozilla using a rendering engine forked from Google. Amazing. It's a profound shift in the industry, and at the same time, when we've got Ladybird and other browser projects that are really ramping up in a big way, it's kind of an interesting and exciting time in the world of web browsing, and where the various Linux distributions decide to go with their default browser tells us a lot about where things are overall headed. Thank you to the Lunduke Journal subscribers. Go to lunduke.com and click on the links. You love links, click on them where you want to watch, listen to, interact with, read, all the support. Thank you to all the subscribers. How to contact the Lunduke Journal, how to become a whistleblower of whatever big tech company or tech foundation you work at. All that information's up at lunduke.com. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, nerds and nerdettes, across this glorious inner tube of ours, I do declare, end broadcast.